Hello everyone, it's Captain Sensible here. Mr. Smelly's asked me to do a quick review of Aventus Cologne before he gives you his opinion. So, Aventus Cologne was released in 2019. The notes on this one are pineapple, green apple, candy apple, and Adam's apple. Now, I took this one on holiday with my wife to Egypt. I thought it'd be ideal for the hot weather. It's quite a fresh fragrance. We both like the fragrance, but unfortunately, the holiday didn't turn out that well. We went on a camel trip, actually. We rode on some camels to look at the pyramids, and the gentleman in charge of the camel tour he was a short-sighted gentleman, and he took a fancy to my wife. He said to me, "Sir, I will give you 4 camels in return for your wife." Now, I thought about it, and I hesitated, and then I thought a little bit more, thought for a couple of minutes really, and then I said, no, it's out of the question. It's not going to happen. And he was very disappointed. My wife heard all of this, and she said, "Well, darling, thank you for not selling me in return for 4 camels, but why did you hesitate so long?" I said, "Well, I was just trying to think how I'd get 4 camels home."
Hello everyone, welcome back to all of you in the Smelly Army. So today we're going to be having a look at Aventus Cologne from the House of Creed, and I'm going to be giving you my review of this fragrance. So today's video is brought to you with the collaboration of my friends over at Fragrance Samples UK, who kindly provided my 5ml sample of this new 2019 release. Fragrance Samples UK is my recommended place to buy fragrance samples wherever you are in the world. They have worldwide shipping. If you're in the UK or 14 other European countries, you can just order with tracked shipping through their website. If you're not in one of those countries, for example, if you're in the USA or elsewhere, you simply email them at info@fragrancesamplesuk.com and request the fragrance that you want, and they can ship to you wherever you are in the world. It's a really great place to sample fragrances. I recommend buying samples rather than blind buying full bottles of fragrances, as a much better way to find out what fragrances really work for you. They've got a tremendous range there. Prices are really good. There's designer stuff, niche stuff, discontinued stuff. The really obvious big names are all there, but there's some quite obscure stuff too. So for a frag head, it's absolute paradise on their website. It's run by my great friend Greg from the channel GreggyBoy76, which is a channel that's been going years and years. Lovely man, a real huge fragrance expert, and I can't recommend these guys enough. So they've sent me a 5ml sample of the big one, Creed Aventus Cologne, which has been reviewed by most of the other big reviewers, so I'm a bit late to the game, sorry about that, and we'll be getting my thoughts on that one now. Don't forget, if you're interested, I have a Patreon group, the Smelly Army Private Members Club. You can join up there for just $2 a month, and you get an extra Mr. Smelly video every single week. It's a fantastic community we're building, and I'd love to see you in there. There's a link in the description, and there's also a link for Fragrance Samples UK's website. So let's dive into it. So of course, Creed Aventus, released back in 2019, is the biggest seller by far from the niche fragrance house of Creed. I think it's probably, well, almost certainly the biggest selling niche fragrance in the world. A huge hype train on that one. A fresh fragrance with pineapple and bergamot in the opening, birchwood, jasmine, oak moss, some patchouli in the base. Very, very nice fragrance, bit of ambergris, and even some vanilla, blackcurrant, a fruity chypre apparently. So in 2019 we have this new release, Aventus Cologne, and of course it's being kind of talked about a lot because Aventus is such a huge fragrance. Some people are saying, well, they're just trying to cash in on Aventus, and of course they're a business. It's about money, and it's a no-brainer that a flanker to the original Aventus would be a good idea. Anything else bearing that name might prompt people who have already bought Aventus to take an interest and maybe think, well, I need that one too. So I don't blame them for releasing Aventus Cologne. It kind of needed to happen. So the Cologne name, it's a fragrance which I think has undoubtedly some similarities with the original Aventus, but it is also in concentration of the fragrance an eau de parfum. The Cologne simply implies a slightly fresher twist on the Aventus scent. Cologne, we tend to associate that word, a lot of us, in our minds, eau de Cologne being a kind of fresh citrusy type fragrance normally. So we associate the word Cologne with a fresher type of fragrance. So you have things like Dior Homme Cologne, which is a flanker to Dior Homme. It doesn't mean that it's an eau de Cologne, which used to signify a lower concentration of perfume oil. Anyway, more importantly, what does the fragrance smell like? how much does it cost? Is it good value for money? All that kind of thing. So the new one, Aventus Cologne, the price for this one in the UK, the 50ml bottle is £155, or a 100ml bottle is £215. I think that's slightly cheaper than Aventus proper. Over in the USA, the 50ml I think is $325, or it's $435 for the 100ml. So certainly not a cheap fragrance. The fragrance notes on this one, according to the Creed website, in the top we've got ginger, mandarin, and pink peppercorn. In the mid, apparently, it's patchouli, sandalwood, and vetiver, and in the base, styrax, birch, musk, and tonka bean. Interestingly, on Fragrantica, they also mention notes of pineapple, green apple, mint, and so those are 3 extra notes that apparently Creed doesn't list on their website. Confusing, isn't it? Okay, so how does it smell? I've had it for a few days now, given it a good few wearings. Here's my 5ml sample. The samples from Fragrance UK come in really nice little sprayers like this. They're plastic, that's much better because they're not going to break. They certainly never break when they send them in the post, and as if, like me, you're rather careless and drop them on the floor occasionally, they won't break. So I like the way they do their sprayers, and they pump out a really nice amount of juice, by the way. So I've been giving this one a really good wearing. I'm about halfway down my sample, and I really like the opening. It's very bright. It reminds me a lot of the original Creed Aventus in the opening. It's very sharp, it's citrusy. I would have said bergamot is in there. I get that hint of pineapple and the green apple. It actually reminds me in the opening a bit of Pineapple Vintage, maybe even the original version, or Pineapple Vintage Intense from Parfums Vintage, which are very fresh pineapple-y takes on the Aventus theme, and I get that from Aventus Cologne. So it's very similar to me to Aventus and or other Aventus clone type fragrances, but leaning very much towards the fresher end of the Aventus olfactory spectrum. Aventus, of course, famous for having loads of batch variations. In the old days, apparently the batches were a bit more smoky. Nowadays, the fragrance, many people, is a shadow of its former self, and is rather more leaning towards the fresher notes with less of the depth and complexity. So the Aventus Cologne thing is kind of leaning even more towards that side of things. We're not going to get that smokiness that we got with the original Aventus in this one. And indeed, as it dries down, the beautiful crispness of the opening fades away naturally, and things get just a tiny bit disappointing, I have to say. We're left with a very pleasant, musky, woody, somewhat unremarkable, generic kind of pleasant Creed-esque dry down. It's a pleasant dry down. The performance is okay but not amazing. For me, slightly less than my 2015 batch of Aventus, and we don't get the mix with the patchouli and the birchwood that comes through in my batch of Aventus and makes it rather interesting. We don't get the blackcurrant fruitiness, and we don't get, for me, quite such an interesting and complex and successful dry down on your skin. We just get a slight fading of the most exciting part of Aventus Cologne, which is the opening, down to a good but not amazing sort of almost, yeah, I know the word generic can be overused, but this doesn't stand out as anything incredible. It could almost be an Aventus clone rather than Cologne, or, you know, has similarities with many fresh designer fragrances on the shelf. And of course, Creed are probably really trying to tap into a much more mainstream audience who maybe heard of Aventus and would be attracted to the idea of a flanker to it. They've got some rather interesting marketing to this one. Some of the sort of logos about the rejigging of Aventus for all, they're calling it, because there was an Aventus Her. The original Aventus is for men. They're saying this is unisex. To me, it leans a little bit towards more what I would expect in a men's fresh fragrance. And I think it's aimed very much at the less discerning market of people who are not big frag heads, but just people out there who've heard of Aventus and will be attracted to the idea of a Cologne flanker. So Cologne, you know, it really is a bit like Aventus Sport or Aventus Light or Diet Aventus. And that may appeal to some people, but it doesn't really appeal to me, and it may not to you if you're into fragrances enough to be watching this video. Also, the grey packaging, I mean, just this kind of silvery grey colour, it sort of signifies a certain weakness, or it just doesn't have a lot of character to me. The original has a dark black bottle, that's got some kind of power to it. This kind of grey colour signifies to me a kind of watered down version of the original, and whilst that's an oversimplification of how this one smells, there's an element of truth in that. So I really enjoy the opening. Amongst fragrances overall, it's a really good smell, but at the price, I really couldn't recommend this would be the best place to go. If you're interested in Creed fresh fragrances, there are tons of brilliant ones. I'm not knocking on the House of Creed. I like Creed fragrances. For example, if you go to Fragrance Samples UK, you can get a 10ml of most of the Creed fragrances for I think £23.73. So there's things like Erolfa, Millesime Imperial, a beautiful kind of watermelon scent, Neroli Sauvage, lovely beautiful fresh fragrances, Green Irish Tweed with the beautiful sandalwood, mint, violet leaf, grassy green accords, lemon verbena. You could buy, I think, let's say 10 mils of each one of them. That would give you 50 mils, the same size and the same amount of perfume as a 50ml bottle of Aventus Cologne, and I think you'd end up spending around about under £120, and you'd have a collection of 5 brilliant, really rather different and fascinating smelling Creed fragrances, rather than going out and buying Aventus Cologne, which would cost you £155 for the 50ml. So what I would recommend is, if you're interested in Creed fragrances, buy some 5 or 10ml samples of them, get yourself a mini collection. Okay, you don't get the nice bottle to look at, but you can really discover them. 10 or 5mls lasts you quite a long time, and then maybe get the one that you really love. Also, sample the fragrances, find the one you like. It doesn't have to be a new one. The old ones are really, really great, and find the fresh Creed that works for you, rather, I would say, than rushing out to buy Aventus Cologne. If you wanted to ask me, should I buy Aventus Cologne or the original Aventus, I would definitely say the original Aventus is better. I haven't got massive experience with the newer batches, which some people find disappointing, but I think there's still more to it than this Cologne version. Very pleasant, a very nice fragrance, but somewhat redundant for the ardent fragrance fan, I think, and you can spend your money much better, in my humble opinion. So go ahead, check out Fragrance Samples UK, not only for the Creed stuff, but if you like Roger Dove, Tom Ford, you can have great fun on there. I highly recommend them. Great service, very reliable, very diligent about how they get those orders out to you safely and quickly. Thank you ever so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about the review. Have you tried Aventus Cologne? Please comment down below, or about anything else that you'd like to talk with me about, and I'll try and answer as many comments as I can. Remember, whatever you're doing in life, let's project. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.